Welcome to A Drop of Silence, the groundbreaking podcast series that dives deep into the realms of controversy. Join us as we bring special guests who share their extraordinary experiences and offer unparalleled insight into history, today's news headlines, and the future. Get ready to embark on a thought-provoking journey where silence speaks volumes and the truth lies somewhere beneath the surface.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
Shalom. My guest this week is Devorah Fick. Devorah is a Hazzan, and she's almost a rabbi, and she is the religious leader of one of the congregations in our community. Now, the reason I chose Devorah to interview is because she has such a joy of life, and it comes from learning more. The more she learns about the music and the history of the Jewish people and the religion, the more joyous she becomes, and it's infectious. And she reminded me of a lot of the Holocaust survivors I took care of. As I've mentioned before, a lot of survivors ran away from the religion. They didn't want to have anything to do with being Jewish, but a vast majority of them turned the other way. They came to new countries because they couldn't go back to where they came from. They had to leave their lives. All of those years before they went into a concentration camp were left behind. They could not return to them. So they had to create themselves again. And one of the ways they did this was through their religion and through the 613 mitzvot that Jews have to practice in their religion. And one of those is standing up for civil rights. And almost all of the Holocaust survivors I have met over the years have been civil rights vigilantes. Almost all of them, if they didn't march with Martin Luther King, they certainly knew about him, and they marched with so many protests, marched like for civil rights for Black people, civil rights for Russians who were in jails when Russia was being so dominant and horrifying. And they were hypervigilant. I can't tell you how many nights I spent with Holocaust survivors and other Jewish women, and we wrote letters after letters. We wrote to presidents. We wrote to Syria when they kidnapped 2 Jewish people. We wrote to Russia, thousands upon thousands of letters for the refuseniks. And it's just by watching them in action and their intensity and their determination that they were going to be successful in this, and that you realize you want to know their stories. You want to know how they got to that position. Welcome to A Drop of Silence, a controversial podcast series where our special guests share their unique experiences and insights regarding world history, the news headlines of today and the future. And with me today is one of my all-time favorite people, Hazzan Devorah Fick. And Hazzan Devorah Fick has got a CD thing like this, but I'm trying to bring it down to a little bit. Devorah is the spiritual leader to Congregation Beth. She served in the U.S. Air Force as an officer for 7 years before changing course to answer a higher calling, service to Am Yisrael. Devorah was ordained as a Hazzan in January 2023 and continues to pursue her Rabbinic Smicha. Devorah serves in the Greater Windsor Interfaith Community as a member of the Interfaith Group of Windsor and Essex County, the Military Institute of Windsor, and as a current member of the board of directors of Iona College in Windsor. Like, you're really busy. She is a passionate student of Torah, committed to engaging our ancient texts so that they are relevant to our modern lives. So welcome, Devorah, to A Drop of Silence. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Pam?
Oh, I'm doing okay. The reason I asked you on, because you and I have had a few talks about Jewish derech. And when you look up derech, it just basically means a way of life, like you're doing a better way of life. Is there another way you would describe it?
I think that along with that, because of course derech means way or our path, our journey, our Jewish journey, is the idea that we choose this journey. We choose how we're going to engage in our Jewish life. And so and in considering that, I think that it's, we also often think of halakha as the Jewish derech. That's the way that we're guided through our commandments, our mitzvot, to live a Jewish life. However, we have to engage in that. It's not a one-way street. This derech goes back and forth. This derech is something that we're walking, and we're engaging with one another, and we're engaging spiritually with God. And so that's more of how I see it. It's not just a forward walk. It's a walk that has a journey and a purpose. And our job is to kind of figure out what that purpose is in our life for this life journey.
And that's where we're going to start, because a lot of times when I had my Jewish radio show at the university, students would come to me. They were terribly afraid of being on campus because there's such a large Muslim community, Jewish Muslim student community, and they were forever having displays on how to become a Muslim, or why Israel is such an awful country, blah, blah, blah. And they became Jewish students at the university got to the point where they were afraid to display any kind of Jewishness. And anything associated with Jewishness they wouldn't do. Well, thanks. This is where Rabbi Galperin really came to the fore. This is long before you. And I had nowhere to go. And I said to him, these kids are terrified. They're terrified to be a public Jew. And he said, well, do you mind if I try a few things? And I said, go for it. Go for it. And he's done quite a bit, because when I was doing my radio show, there were like 20 kids who were in the Jewish Student Association. Now there's like 150, almost 200. So he's done well. But the problem still remains. If you ask a kid, what does it mean to be a public Jew right now? And another question that always came up is a Jewish star on Instagram, or should they wear a Mogen David, And they were terrified to go to Detroit to Hillel, and that's like one of the main youth groups. And they wouldn't march in the parades, the Jewish parades, and they were terrified to show up for a Shabbos dinner at the rabbi's house or anybody's house. They didn't want to be associated. And then if you ask them, well, okay, but if you're Jewish, what do you stand for? They didn't know. So to me, I think that's where this conversation starts. Why don't they know? Why don't they know what they stand for anymore?
And are you asking me what I think?
I'm asking you.
Yeah, what I think part of the problem is. Yeah, I mean, so I think that a lot of this, and I don't have all of the answers, but what comes to mind immediately for me is that our grandparents after World War II, they knew what the stakes were. They knew what the consequences were without if they were here in Canada or the United States. So in North America, they had to create Jewish community. They had to rebuild. It was very, very clear what the objective was and where it needed to go. And so I think that for the generations of the 20th century, it was very clear what the focus needed to be on and why engaging in Jewish community was so absolutely important. What happened, I think, is that you get to, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a young Gen Xer in the sense that I'm right at the border of Gen X. I'm in the last couple of years. I'm a cusp. Yeah. And before the millennials. So there's some parts of my experience that are millennial as well, but I'm technically an Xer. And what you see with the Gen Xers my age that go into the millennial generation, I think there was a loss of that type of motivation. There was a loss of understanding of the value of community and strong Jewish identity. Our grandparents and our parents understood, but it was starting to generationally become not so present, not so real. The Holocaust was a historical event that we learned about in school, we learned about in shul, maybe it was talked about with our grandparents' generation, but it was not as potent. It wasn't as present in the Jewish experience in North America by the 1980s, 1990s, and then the turn of the millennium in the year 2000. So you see this lack of understanding of what our identity is and why this is relevant. And I also think you have this whole coming of the information age, social media, everything shifted in my generation. My kids cannot believe that when I was in high school, I didn't even have an email account. I didn't get an email account until I went to university. I was a freshman at Michigan State University, and I got my first email account. And it was this old type of email too, where you didn't even use a mouse. You clicked, number 1 for your inbox, number 2. It was very old, right? Yeah. So that was my first email, and that was in 1997. I didn't have a cell phone until about 1999. So I was in my second or third year of university at that point. So all of this happened, and then it just exploded. I remember getting on Facebook for the first time. I was a mom with 2 little kids when I got on Facebook for the first time. So, all of that happened in my teens and into my young adulthood. Massive, massive changes in the world. And so I think what has happened is that because the shift was so huge and so fast, our understanding and our relationship with 20th century Jewish ideals and values is it's a little pulled off. And so we have to then determine for us and for our children, what is the purpose in this? I kind of, when I was in seminary, I kind of had a little bit of a crisis of faith at one point. I remember I was in probably my second year of seminary, and I just felt like, what is the purpose of this? Does any of this actually matter to anyone? If I go in and I lead a service, and I think it was part of my growth as an identity as a Jewish professional. If I'm coming in and I'm leading a service, is this meaningful to anyone? Does anyone really care? Why are these people showing up? What does this actually mean? And through that experience of kind of living this crisis of faith, I grew in my purpose, but that was really hard. And it meant, I was in seminary and I was studying and I was with people who were excited about Jewish identity and Judaism. And I was still struggling with that. So what is it for your average Jewish adult, young adult, teenager? How do we actually create meaning and identity and value in this? Because it's probably not going to be coming from the same place that it came from for our parents or our grandparents. I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly what you would, the you know, what you would.
I thought about this really long and hard. I'm substantially older than you. I'm so sorry. But it really came to a fore this week because I asked children of Holocaust survivors, the second generation, if they would come on and talk about what it was like to be raised by somebody who was a Holocaust survivor. And I had one person say to me, I don't even know what their story is. They've never talked about it.
Yeah.
And I went, wow, because I knew this person's mother's story because she had told me when I was a nurse. And I'm sitting thinking, okay, well, this brings a whole new level to this, like what is going on. And the one thing that the Holocaust survivors had was that they had ethics. They had really, really strong ethics. And a Jew could not be indifferent was kind of like their motto, like if there was a problem, if the union needed help, or if the Black Lives Matter needed help, or if we needed to write letters, they all did that. That was their being. That's just who they were. That's how they lived. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at that, the kids didn't even know what happened to the Holocaust survivors, like their moms and dads. And then you have this intermarriage, like it's, what is it, 85% now are marrying outside?
I think it's more in the 70s. 70s? But it's heading in that direction with certain generations, not your generation, obviously. So it's not across the board. But if you look at younger, my people and younger, that's where it starts to explode in the non-Orthodox community in North America. So that, and I don't have all the figures in front of me, but that is the overall information.
So I think we've missed somewhere. It's just my thought, and I'm probably wrong. You probably know way more than I do. But it was always like, thou shalt not kill, visit the sick, go and see a wedding for the bride and groom, for all of those things that were so ingrained in all of us and my age group too. But now as the intermarriage is coming, I think I don't know. I think we've missed the mark. I think we have to, you're going to marry this person? Great. Come on in. Welcome. And let me show you how to do this. But even, let's talk about how you can be part of the community. But then where is the point? Why is that Jewish person not looking for another Jewish person?
Okay.
Where's the pride gone? You know, what is that called? Pericotta vote or something? Pericotta vote?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. So when you're talking about this intermarriage thing, I think there's two directions that you're looking at. The reality of the situation is young Jewish people, for whatever reason, are choosing to look outside of the Jewish community for their main person, their bashert, their soulmate. What is leading to, is that a weak Jewish identity, or is it something else? What is the reason for that? And then when this happens, not if it happens, when it happens, because it's happening, how do we then, as a Jewish community, how do I, as a Jewish communal leadership, clergy, how do I react to that? How are the different movements reacting, and how do our communities more broadly react to that? So, when I came here to Bethel, my first week of work, I went and visited our cemetery. Mm-hmm. And I was very curious as I walked around the cemetery, because I knew that our congregation had embraced the interfaith marriage and was recognizing patrilineal Jews, so Jews who are the children of a man who is Jewish, but his wife is not. They were recognizing those children as Jewish in our community. So I would have a bar bat mitzvah for that child. I would have a brit milah, so a circumcision for that child. And historically, in most Jewish communities in the world since the Second Temple period, it has been a matrilineal identity. So you are Jewish if your mother and your grandmother, your mother's mother, are Jewish. So our community had done that. But as I walked around the cemetery, I became concerned. I became concerned because it was very clear to me that our cemetery was not burying the spouses or other family members, so children, of non-Jewish descent.
That's right.
I could tell this simply by reading the markers in the cemetery. It would have been very obvious had there been non-Jewish people buried there. And so I questioned it at the time because I was concerned that we have a situation where we are being so affirming, so inclusive for all of the things that lead through life, from birth to marriage to child rearing, all of the life cycles, until it's time to bury a person. And we talked about this as a community. Recently, our community voted to have this changed. And it wasn't just because I asked the question. This was already something that was coming up. One of the things to consider is that even in our community here at Congregation Beth in Windsor, we have not our intermarriage rate in our community overall is not even, I don't think, above 50%. But with younger families, it is. So we're seeing this in our community. And that was one of the concerns. One of the concerns was, what happens if we have a child in this community who, God forbid, something happens to that child, and it's a child who is of patrilineal descent? Have we covered that base? So as a Jewish community, we're having to address these issues as these things happen. But on the other, and we're doing that. And I think the congregation here, is doing a phenomenal job of that. They're really, really practicing what they preach. They really are following through. When they realized there was a problem, they came forward and said, how are we going to react as a community? We have an issue here. We have to engage in this. And they did it well. They did it beautifully. They did it kindly. And I was so happy with how people engaged in that process. But then we are asking, and this is what you're getting back to, this is happening. We are reacting in that way. Other Jewish communities are choosing a different way of reacting. They're saying, no, we're going to push back. We're going to stay with our tradition. The conservative movement, for example, still doesn't recognize patrilineal descent. And while in the conservative movement, there are a lot of rabbis who would like to be able to perform intermarriage or interfaith marriages, the Rabbinical Assembly still doesn't allow for that. They have a process of a halakhic process that they go through. The Reform movement has already said that this is fine. Not the Reform movement in Canada, though, which is interesting. And we are a Canadian congregation. So the Reform movement in Canada has stuck with a more traditional viewpoint. The Reform movement in the United States has embraced interfaith marriage. And the reason that that's important is to understand is that since that happened, the rates have continued to increase. So along with that, I question with this, how much is it simply not that these people don't have a strong Jewish identity, but they don't have a strong sense that marrying another Jew is extremely important to that Jewish identity. I don't necessarily think that for some of these people that they see or that they've been raised to believe that marrying someone outside of their Jewish faith or peoplehood is actually compromising who they are as a Jew and their ability to raise Jewish children. Because if they were raised in the past 20 years with the Reform movement saying this is no big deal, you can get married. And I'm not actually saying the Reform movement says it's no big deal.
Yeah.
I still think they think it's a big deal because clergy are still supposed to be married to other Jews. But I think that that's the perception. When it's allowed, it becomes kind of considered that it is no big deal. And so if something is no big deal, and it's just not something that is prevented or taboo or even spoken about as not the ideal, then you don't necessarily consider that a threat to your Jewish identity or your Jewish life or your Jewish home. And I think that that is part of what is happening. I want to stop, though, because I could keep talking, and I would like you to be able to interject a little bit and ask some questions.
I having seen this reaction this week, and it was several people, I can't help but think that they're ashamed to be Jewish. And that their parents, like, even though they were Holocaust survivors and they practiced their faith and everything, but by hiding what happened to them, by hiding what they had to go through and where they got the strength from, which are, halacha, that we've got 500 and the 613 mitzvot and all of that jazz. I think a lot of kids grew up being afraid to be Jewish. And I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I get that. And when you talk to the university students, and these were kids from Toronto, Vancouver, wherever they came from, they were terrified to have, like, to stand and say, yeah, I'm Jewish, so what? They didn't have that inner strength to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And yet,
I'm sorry. Okay. So I think the thing is that I'm saying that it may not actually be, for some of these people, intermarriage may not actually be an indication of weak Jewish identity. I do think, though, for some people, it possibly is. I think what you're saying is valid. I met with some college students, university students here in Windsor, who were part of a Jewish student, I think it was a Jewish law student organization.
Yeah.
And I really sensed from them a fear of being too present
Jewish
in the community, to speaking up too much advertisement for programs. That is a very, very big difference from when I was that age. Something has shifted, I think, in our society. I know anti-Semitism is on the rise. I think we're all aware of it, whether we know the statistics or not. It is clear, it is present in our experience. I do know that there are children in our community who go to local high schools, and they have had minor, yet still very clear anti-Semitic incidents in their school. Their parents have talked to me about these things and said, how should we react? What should we do? It's difficult because, on one hand, if you fight back against it, it could actually become a bigger problem. I think that's what these parents are worried about. The kids will just kind of walk away. They don't want to engage. On the other hand, if we just continue to allow it to go on, where does it end? And this is something that is very present. I've done some work with the community, the greater community, to do some education for anti-Semitism in classrooms. So, for example, I will go from time to time into a high school on an education day for the teachers, where the students are not there. The teachers are going to different classes throughout the day, and I will be one of those classes. And it's helpful to the teachers because they don't know what to do. They haven't been trained to deal with this. This is not normal bullying. This is not normal. These are not normal problems. How do they engage? And so I also do think that there is possibly a fear of being Jewish, being openly Jewish. We also see in our community here in Windsor that I think the data says that there's something like 1,200 Jews in Windsor. I don't see most of those people.
Right.
So I don't know why that is. I'm not sure. And are they purposefully not identifying openly as Jews, or are they just not interested in Jewish communal life? Because there's a difference between being afraid to engage and being afraid to be part of things and simply just not being interested. That's the difficulty to discern.
So, yeah, but it's definitely there. There's definitely that feeling there at the universities that these kids are afraid. And I can't help but think if they'd had a stronger early childhood and education of being a proud Jew, and this is what's expected of you. And in fact, one of the stories that came out a few years ago, Sunshine, I don't know if you saw that, with Ray Fiennes, and it was this one family in Europe during the Holocaust. They all went through, like all of them were wiped out except for this one son and the mother. And the mother, she was just Jewish, and she made chicken soup for people when they had colds. And she was just a very quiet but very proud Jewish person. And she didn't shrivel up at the Nazis, and her neighbors protected her. And the son, who goes through all the Holocaust camps and everything, he can't figure out why they didn't send her off with everybody else. And they said, well, she's to be respected. She's to be honored because she is this. But she was also immersed in the rest of the community, helping her neighbors out. So they helped her out. And I'm sitting there thinking that just resonates with me. And then these Holocaust survivors kids saying, I don't even know my mother's story. And I'm like, okay, so we've really missed the mark somewhere. And I'm not sure where.
Yeah. I taught in a religious school in Ann Arbor, Michigan for a couple of years. And I was hired to teach the kids to daven Musaf. So in a traditional service, you have this additional set of prayers toward the end of the service. And it's just like very traditional prayers. This is not something that, this is not like tunes that are fun to sing. This is very traditional prayers. So I was hired to teach these kids who are in grade 6 and 7, how to daven Musaf, how to pray Musaf, and lead that in their service for their bar and bat mitzvah. And I was concerned because I thought, what am I supposed to do? Walk in and say, okay, everybody buckle your seatbelts. We're going to learn these prayers. They're in Hebrew. You don't know what this is about. It's very, very kind of traditional and a lot of work to do. So for a couple of weeks, I didn't teach them how to sing these prayers and how to learn these prayers. I just got to know these kids. And I kept looking for an in to find purpose in this, because this was not going to be super fun. This was just going to be work. And how was I going to get them to invest in learning this? How was I going to convince them that this was actually important to their Jewish identity? Being able to lead these prayers was something that would be of value to them as Jewish adults. Because I do think that being able to participate communally in prayer is really important to Jewish identity, to being able to be together. If we can pray together, if we can come together in certain ways, and I can do that here, and I can go to another part of the world and do it there, and it's all the same, that's really, really important. But to convince kids in grades 6 and 7, like, how do I convince them? So it was about 3 weeks in, and the kids walked in, and they were very somber. They walked into the classroom where I taught them, very somber. And I sensed that something was really wrong. And so I had them sit down, and I said, I sense that something has happened. Are you guys okay? And one of the kids just burst into tears. He just started crying. And one of the girls in the class said, there was a situation at our school. There was anti-Semitic situation at our school, and this was really upsetting to some of us. And I don't know what had happened right before they walked into the classroom with me, but somehow this must have come up in conversation, and they were really, really upset. So we just sat there for about a half hour and talked about this situation. And at the end of it, I let them talk, and I said, you know what? Next week, when we get together, we're going to start learning Musaf. Musaf is really important. It's important to learn to pray together, because when everything else is gone, when everybody is turned against you, when things go wrong in your life, when you have a significant loss in your life, you know, you have 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years of tradition that you can rely on. You are really, really lucky to be Jewish. You are lucky to have community and to be able to come here every Shabbat and have that community and sing together and pray together. These are the things that are going to sustain you. This is the reason. What happened during the Holocaust? What this anti-Semitism and sitting here together and supporting each other and being here for each other, that is the reason. And they got it. You know, it became very clear. And those kids came in every week and they learned to daven Musaf. I'm not saying that every week they were excited to do it, but they were willing to do it because it gave them a window into perspective of what this was really about. I also think it's about spiritual life and faith. And I have deep concern that during the 20th century, there was perhaps such a focus on the Holocaust and the loss and rebuilding. And perhaps there was not a lot of focus on growing spiritually. It really bothers me when I talk to Christians who will share their faith with me, and then they're surprised when I share my faith with them and they've never heard a Jewish person do that. It bothers me. Judaism is a spiritually rich faith and tradition. It's beautiful. And if we understand that and value that, this world needs that. People in this world need to know that our tradition provides wonderful, wonderful spiritual tradition. And it's not just about rebuilding and surviving. It can go beyond that. And we have to teach that to our kids as well. I think they need that today, maybe more than anything.
More than ever. Yeah. I think I agree with you. So this is your job then. This is what you feel your job is to bring us back to where we are confident, proud Jews. And by doing the thing, like people always think it's the religion is the prayers and everything. And that's a big part of it. But also there's so many things that you're just expected to do, you know, like helping an old lady across the street that's being Jewish, and stuff like that. And I wish I could figure out. I think you're on the right path. I'm hoping, because I think that's what we need. I think for Jews, in order to survive another Holocaust or this rise in anti-Semitism, they have to start looking at themselves in a different way. Do you agree?
I agree. I think that understanding that this is not, we were born this way, or we converted to be this way. We now have this obligation of mitzvot, of living a Jewish identity. Yeah, there's an obligation in that, but there's a great joy in that.
Yeah.
I love getting up every single morning. I daven every day. I have a spiritual practice. I get up and I love to put my talit on and lay tefillin and do these things. Now, as a clergy person, I definitely feel obligated to do that. I think that's my responsibility as a clergy person, to do that for my community, because if I don't take care of myself spiritually, I can't take care of people spiritually, right?
Right.
And also, I love it. It's like this isn't painful. Once you learn to do these things and you learn that these practices can be meaningful and rich and beautiful, you can begin to really, really love them. Now, it doesn't mean that you, Pam, are going to love getting up at 7:30 in the morning and putting on tefillin and saying prayers the way that I do. I haven't always loved doing that in that way either. I've changed and evolved and have been open to that process. But saying, as Jewish adults, as Jewish parents and grandparents, and even kids in the religious school when they're coming up on bar and bat mitzvah, you need to have a spiritual practice in your life. You need to engage with God and have a spiritual life because you are a spiritual being. And that is what Judaism teaches. That is Jewish tradition. That is Jewish belief. That's not Devorah's opinion. That is Jewish tradition. We are eternal spiritual beings. I was at a funeral today, co-leading a funeral, and my colleague talked about that. He said, we are eternal spiritual beings. Our neshamot are real. This is real. And so I don't want people to lose that. It doesn't mean you have to be Orthodox or you have to engage in a certain way or that you have to do all the things. This is a journey. Start with one thing and then see where it takes you and see where it takes you to the next thing. But to actively and purposefully and intentionally do that, it's rewarding. And that's what I want people to understand. Choosing to walk that walk and see where it takes you. Because, you know, I have very rarely seen that people have regretted trying to do that and taking care of themselves emotionally and spiritually. I think it's actually pretty obvious that those are healthy behaviors. So I want people to learn to do that if they're willing to try.
Well, thank you so much, Devorah, for taking the time to talk to me today. And I'm hoping you're going to come back because I think we just scratched the surface with this little conversation. So thank you and have a good night.
You too. Thank you so much, Pam.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
This podcast is brought to you by Unbreakable Bindings Publishing Company. Executive produced by Lori Baldassi, produced by Ryan Richardson, hosted by Pam Goldstein.